Hey everybody, we made it to season 23, which has no theme, so it's kind of a free-for-all. So hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, do whatever you want, just be safe. The Secret Service is mostly known as the organization that protects the president, but long before they started doing that, they were fighting the growing epidemic of counterfeiting in post-Civil War America. In the 1970s and 80s, the Secret Service was still battling counterfeiting, and they had recently taken another forger off the streets. But when they searched for his printing equipment, which is known as a plant, they found much more than they had bargained for. On top of engraved printing plates and counterfeit bills, they found notes about financial scams, a kill kit, and even audio recordings of sexual assaults. This is Monsters. The details of the crimes in this story are true, but many of the names have been replaced with pseudonyms. James Mitchell DeBardeleben Jr. was born on March 20th, 1940 in Little Rock, Arkansas. He went by Mike and was the middle of three children born to James Sr. and Mary Lou DeBardeleben. He had an older sister named Linda and a younger brother named Ralph. Mike's young life was not stable by any means. His father was commissioned as a lieutenant in the United States Army after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December of 1941 and was stationed in Washington, D.C. After the move, Mike's mother, Mary Lou, began drinking heavily, and James Sr. began having an affair with a woman he worked with. Mary Lou was aware of the infidelity and considered the affair an emotional divorce, but the couple remained married. In 1945, the family moved to Austin, Texas, just before James Sr. was sent to the Pacific Theater. In Austin, Linda would later report that their mother was often drunk and she had to pick up the slack in taking care of her brothers. Mary Lou would sometimes take the children with her to the bars where she would pick up men and have her own affairs. When James Sr. returned to the States after a 9-month deployment, Linda said that he was so embarrassed by the state of their family that he rejoined the Army and got stationed at Fort Campbell in Kentucky so they could start over somewhere else. As James Sr.'s career advanced, the family moved to Frankfurt, West Germany, and then to The Hague in the Netherlands. Mike would recall wanting to please his parents but feeling like they had unrealistic demands. While Linda and Ralph spent time outside, Mike tended to stay inside alone drawing. His parents didn't encourage his art, so he tried to excel academically, but that only lasted until his teens. The DeBardelebens returned to the U.S. in 1953 when James Sr. retired from the military and they settled in Albany, New York. Once in high school, Mike became the victim of bullying, and it seemed that he turned his anger towards his mother. It's believed that, due to his mother's past neglect of him and his siblings, Mike developed a hatred of his own mother, which eventually became a hatred of all women. When Mike was 16 years old, after Linda had left home for college, he started regularly assaulting Mary Lou. In September of 1956, Mike and a friend purchased a .22 caliber H&R Model 922 revolver and a .22 caliber Astra auto pistol. Just 2 weeks later, Mike was reported firing one of the guns in a wooded area and arrested for possession of a concealed weapon. That would be the start of a lengthy rap sheet obtained by Mike over the years. In May of 1957, he would add reckless driving to the rap sheet. Shortly after that, he was expelled from high school, so he made a deal with the judge. In exchange for both his previous charges, he would join the military. In June of 1957, Mike joined the U.S. Air Force. It won't come as a surprise that Mike's military career was short-lived. He completed basic training and was stationed at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, but wasn't even there a year before he was court-martialed for a number of minor offenses such as incorrect insignia and improper uniform. He spent 2 months in the stockade, and almost as soon as he was released, he was written up for being AWOL. After another short stint in the stockade, Mike was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. There, the doctor reported that Mike was not likely to have a sustained, satisfactory service career. Due to that, Mike was given a less than honorable discharge in August of 1958. He moved to Fort Worth, Texas, where his parents were living by then, and shortly after his arrival, Ralph dropped out of high school and joined the U.S. Army. From that point forward, Mike drifted around life with no real plan. In 1959, he enrolled in a local high school in an attempt to get his diploma, but was expelled 2 months later. In the summer of that year, he married a teenager named Linda Weir, but they separated 3 weeks later. She would end up going into premature labor and having their stillborn daughter months later. By the end of the year, Mike was arrested for a failed attempt to rob a service station and a string of auto thefts in the area. He was given 5 years of probation. By March of 1960, Mike had gotten a 17-year-old girl pregnant, and they married in June. Not long after the baby was born, Mike abandoned his wife and child, but the girl was already pregnant again. That baby was put up for adoption, and Mike was already moving on with his life. While that was happening, other members of the DeBardeleben family were suffering. In August of 1961, 19-year-old Ralph was on leave from the Army when he and Mike got into an argument, causing Ralph to book himself into a motel room. Ralph would tell his sister Linda that he was not planning to go back to the Army after his 12 days of leave were over. In order to keep his word, Ralph drove his car into a church parking lot and used a hose to reroute the exhaust into the interior of the car. He was found dead later that evening. In the years that followed, Mike made another attempt to get an education. He got a waiver to enroll at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth without a high school diploma. He took a variety of classes and didn't perform well. Then his probation was revoked in September of 1962 and Mike was sent to prison. When Mike was released 8 months later, his parents had moved yet again, this time to Arlington, Virginia. From that point, Mike stayed with his parents as he recovered from a string of ailments. He laid in his bedroom and used a projector to watch pornography. He would also have women come over so he could photograph them nude. If his parents complained, Mike would threaten to kill them, at times using a hatchet and a letter opener to do so. When Mike went after his mother with a razor, his father finally called the authorities and their son spent 45 days in a psychiatric facility. The doctors there determined that Mike did not suffer from any mental illness and he was released back to his father. 4 months later, in September of 1964, Mike married his third wife, a 19-year-old named Wanda Faye Davis, who went by Faye. She would be the first wife who began participating in crimes with Mike, and she would later testify about their activities. She explained that, shortly after their wedding, Mike convinced her to take some nude photographs. Then he threatened to send them to her family if she didn't help him commit a number of frauds. First, he would have Faye look up the contact info for widowed women, something that was easy to do at the library back then. She would call them and talk to them at length, which most were happy to do since they were usually lonely. She would find out what bank they used, and then Mike would contact them a few days later saying he was an investigator from their bank. He would tell them they needed to withdraw some money from the bank and wait for him at home. He would show up the same day, flash a forged badge, and collect the money, which he said was part of some fake investigation. It's not clear the exact details, but he probably told them they would have their money reimbursed only to never hear from him again. Faye explained that they committed that scam repeatedly for about 18 months. Then they held the manager of a bank's wife for ransom in April of 1969. During their marriage, she described a time when Mike and one of her cousins picked up a young girl and assaulted her, but the charges were eventually dropped. Apparently, since the girl willingly got into the car, it was okay that they sexually and physically assaulted her. Mike had shown her photos of other young women he said he had sexually abused. She would describe threatening to go to the police only to be tied to the bed and sexually abused herself. It wasn't until she got pregnant that she finally knew she had to break free. During her first pregnancy, Mike pushed her down a flight of stairs, causing a miscarriage. When she became pregnant again, she was able to get away from him and she was granted a divorce in 1969. At some point after she had a baby, Mike did force his way into her apartment and attempted to sexually assault her, but she screamed loud enough to alert the apartment manager and Mike fled. It wasn't that long before Mike lost interest in Faye and had moved on to who would become his fourth wife. Mike had met Karen while she was a senior in high school and immediately developed an obsession. She initially resisted his advances, but after Mike got into a motorcycle accident, Karen began visiting him. When her mother found out and demanded she stop, it only made the girl want to see him more. Mike suggested they solve the problem by getting married, which they did in 1970 just after Karen's 18th birthday. Mike began his process of manipulation and abuse right away. He had actually written out a list of how to control women, which said, get his satisfaction early. Isolate her contacts with others. Don't let her make any decisions. Don't let her acquire any skills, working, driving, social skills, etc. Don't let her have any power, bank accounts, ownership, inside information, material for blackmail. Never trust her completely. Don't enlighten her with knowledge, especially of psychology. Always remember that the relationship is temporary. Likewise, prepare to cut her loose before she does it to you. Set the quote-unquote price higher than needed at first. Whip, infidelity, extreme humiliation, then gradually reduce to keep at an adequate level. Actively seek out a new partner when she begins showing signs of rebellion. Make her more dependent. Drugs, live-in country, no phone or hidden for my use only, no driver's license, no books except fantasy, no fancy clothes, no doctors. Never show weakness, guilt, or insecurity. Mike eventually got Karen to begin helping him commit frauds and went back to his old bank investor scam for a while. Then on April 30th, 1971, Mike went to the home of the vice president of a bank in Springfield, Virginia, and held his wife ransom. Just as he had years before with Faye, he had his wife help him secure the ransom. Mike used the ransom money to start a nude photography studio in Washington, D.C., but the business failed and he went back to what he knew: crime. On May 16, 1973, he carried out another ransom, but that time he acted alone. That time, despite having demanded $75,000, the bank manager only put $200 in marked bills in the bag and dropped it off at the designated spot. Then he returned to the bank and called the FBI, who raced to his house and found his wife and infant daughter unharmed. After that failed ransom, Mike and Karen moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and attempted 2 more extortions, which Karen would later testify were unsuccessful. They then moved back to Arlington, and Mike decided to get into the counterfeiting game, but not before one last attempt at a ransom. In April of 1974, Mike found a used car for sale in the newspaper and met with a woman to take it for a test drive. While testing the vehicle, he used wax to make an impression of the key and returned the following evening to steal the car. The next morning, he waited for Marshall Groom, the CEO of a bank in Fairfax, Virginia, to leave his house. He had watched Marshall for days prior and learned his routine. As the man came to a stop sign, Mike rammed his vehicle from behind with the car he had stolen the day before. Then, as Marshall got out, thinking it was a simple accident, he forced him into his own vehicle and drove him to a motel where he tied him up. Karen drove Marshall's car to a gas station across the street from the bank and left a note on the window which read, "Roll window down, leave the money on the front seat, walk up Woodhaven Drive in same direction you were driving, do not look back, do not talk to anyone. Walk 3 blocks and wait 3 minutes, then return to bank. You will be notified of Mr. Groom's location." At about 8:30 a.m., Mike had Marshall call the bank and made a ransom demand. Then he placed the captive on the bed and left. The assistant left the money where instructed, but nobody ever picked it up. It's not known why, but something scared the kidnapper away. Marshall eventually wiggled himself free and called the police, who found him unharmed in his vehicle at the gas station with the money still on the front seat. Mike must have figured he was not cut out for kidnap and ransom and began printing counterfeit money at his home on South Columbus Street in Arlington. A counterfeiter's printing equipment is called a plant. There's not much information available about his first counterfeiting operation, but he had managed to get his hands on a Multilith 1250 printing press and was making fake $20 bills. In 1975, Karen left Mike, but she was still afraid of him. She spoke to a lawyer about how to get a divorce and go into hiding, something she would ultimately not need to do since he was arrested not long after. Karen was interviewed after that arrest, as some evidence of sexual sadism was found in his home when it was searched, but she didn't give the investigators any detail at that time, saying Mike would kill her. It wasn't until after his final arrest that she finally spoke to investigators about the crimes he had committed while with her. Mike was convicted of counterfeiting charges and sent to federal prison, but he was released in 1978 after serving 23 months. A clerical error at the Crime Information Center led to Mike being listed in the database as deceased. He quickly moved back to Arlington, where he continued his life of crime. That included going right back to counterfeiting, but he also seemed to increase his violence against women. Mike still owned the house on South Columbus Street in Arlington, so he moved back in and took a job as a barber since it was a condition of his parole. He purchased a dark blue 1977 Ford Thunderbird, and after some time he stopped showing up at work. A 19-year-old woman named Lucy Alexander went on a camping trip to Indian River in southern Delaware with her boyfriend over the Labor Day weekend of 1978. On the evening of September 3rd, the couple went to a bar and eventually got into a fight, causing Lucy to leave alone. As she was walking back to their campsite, a man pulled over and offered her a ride, and in the 70s and 80s, hitchhiking was a popular way to get around, so Lucy accepted. Once they got to the campground, Mike pulled out a badge, claimed he was an FBI agent, and told Lucy she was under arrest for hitchhiking. He handcuffed the young woman and began driving again, claiming he was taking her to the local authorities. Eventually he pulled over, gagged her, and forced her onto the floor of the back seat with a blanket over her. He drove around for hours before stopping in a residential neighborhood and taking her into a house. There, Mike proceeded to sexually assault Lucy multiple times over the next 18 hours. Lucy would say he had trouble maintaining an erection until he made her call him Daddy. He eventually redressed her, let her out to his car, and then drove around again for hours. He let her out in a secluded area in Delaware, and she eventually flagged down a state trooper. On February 4th, 1979, Mike went into the rental office of a newly built residential development in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and introduced himself as Al with either the last name Wise or Weiss. The agent wasn't sure. His target was 31-year-old Elizabeth Mason, and he went on to tell her that he and his wife were planning to move to the area and were in the market for a house. She showed him some listings, not intending to go visit any of them, but eventually Mike was able to convince her to. They looked at a few in town, but it wasn't until they came across a more secluded house that Mike decided to get out and take a closer look. There was an agent lockbox, and once inside, Elizabeth would tell police that her customer made a big deal about picking out where all his furniture would go, something she felt was an act. She had walked down a hallway to the back of the house, and when she returned, Mike was pointing an automatic pistol at her. Elizabeth said she had read a magazine article about a woman who scared off an attacker by just acting crazy, so she tried that, but Mike was not scared. He ended up hitting her with the pistol and then trying to shoot her, but the gun didn't fire. The police would later find a full magazine on the floor of the house and believed that Elizabeth might have ended up hitting the magazine release when she was flailing around acting crazy. Once it was clear Mike wouldn't be able to shoot her, he began beating her more with the pistol. Elizabeth finally gave up, and Mike told her he was just going to tie her up and rob her. As soon as the woman was tied up, though, the attacker pushed her to the ground and started strangling her. Elizabeth would later say he was screaming, quote, "Pass out, just pass out, bitch." Finally, she did pass out. It's estimated that Elizabeth was unconscious for about 45 minutes, during which time Mike sexually assaulted her and then left in her car. When she woke up, she said she remembered being in the house in a daze for a while before leaving the house. She was holding her pants in her hands, which were taped behind her back, and her pantyhose were around her ankles. She managed to make it to a neighbor's house and ring the doorbell, and they called 911 while she was on the porch. She said they were too afraid to open the door. Elizabeth was in the hospital for 2 days before she was well enough to be interviewed by a detective. Her car was found, but there was no evidence to reveal the true identity of her attacker. The case went cold, but once Elizabeth was back home, she received a phone call where a man asked if she was Elizabeth Mason, the real estate agent. When she said yes, he just hung up. She said she recognized the voice as being the same man who had attacked her. On Memorial Day weekend of 1979, Mike went to the Maryland shore where he knew there would be an abundance of young people celebrating the holiday. 20-year-old Lori Jensen was the manager of a small convenience store in Ocean City, which she closed at just before midnight on June 1st. As she was walking home, a man pulled over next to her, flashed a badge, and told her he was a police officer. He ordered her into his car and questioned her about a local robbery. She told him that she had been at work at the time of the robbery, so he asked Lori to direct him to her boss's house so he could verify her alibi. She complied, but when they got to the house, Mike stopped the car, told the young woman she was under arrest, and handcuffed her hands behind her back. That time, Mike drove to a secluded area and stopped the car. As soon as he did, Lori was able to get the door open, jumped out of the car, and started screaming. Mike quickly subdued her, putting cuffs on her ankles and then covering her face with tape. After that, he drove around for 2 hours before ending up at a house. Just like with Lucy Alexander, he sexually assaulted her multiple times, needing her to call him daddy in order to maintain an erection. That time, he locked his victim to an eye bolt on the floor inside a closet between assaults. Lori also said that he called her Becky for some reason, took pictures of her, and made an audio recording of him torturing and sexually assaulting her. She would later report that he forced her to perform oral sex on him multiple times and that his penis was quite small. It would turn out that Lucy had given police the same detail. He held her for more than 24 hours before driving her back to Maryland and releasing her just a few blocks from her family's home. He said that if she told the police, he would release the pictures he took of her. Mike put his house on South Columbia Street up for sale in 1978, and it eventually sold, and he rented a house on a dead-end street in Falls Church, Virginia, just west of Arlington. He used the name Frank A. Turner to purchase another Multilith 1250 offset printer and assembled it in a bedroom. There, Mike set up a counterfeiting operation that didn't produce perfect $20 bills by any means, but they were decent enough for the untrained eye to not notice. He started with 8.5-inch by 11-inch sheets of 20-pound Crane's Crest white paper. That was determined to be the paper that would best match U.S. currency, which is actually printed onto paper that's made with 25% linen and 75% cotton. He used a screen to dye the paper a matching ivory hue. Then he used the offset printer to print the front and back of the paper. He affixed a treasury seal and a serial number, then he printed tiny little marks of red and blue to simulate the synthetic threads that can be found in the real currency paper. Once dry, Mike cut the bills, soaked them in tea, and hand-crumpled them. Then he graded them and put them into batches labeled A, A-, B, etc. In July of 1979, he took the best-looking notes and began exchanging them for real currency. He would go to shopping centers and malls outside of where he lived, buy something small with a counterfeit $20 bill, and walk out with the change. He would be successful most of the time, but occasionally the clerk would refuse to accept the bill. That wouldn't end with the shopper being detained and arrested, though. They would generally just leave and never be seen again. That happened at a donut shop in a mall in Florence, Kentucky, where the clerk was able to give the Secret Service a description of Mike, but that was a needle in a haystack. Mike spent the rest of 1980 traveling between states, passing forged 20s. He hit shopping centers in Elizabeth, New Jersey, Scranton, Pennsylvania, Durham, North Carolina, Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, Dallas, Texas, New Orleans, Louisiana, Columbus, Ohio, and various cities in Virginia. By the end of the year, Mike had passed about 1,500 fake $20 bills in 38 different states. Those crimes were just how Mike supported himself financially, though. Between his trips to pass counterfeit bills at various malls, he spent his time abducting and assaulting women. 25-year-old Diane Overton had gone to a club to see a band play on November 1st, 1980. The club was about an hour and a half away from her home, and back then there was no GPS. You couldn't even print out directions from the internet, so though she found the club all right, she had a difficult time finding her way home, and it took longer than usual. At about 4 a.m., she saw a red light flashing behind her and believed that a police officer was pulling her over. On the side of the road, a man approached her window and told her to pull ahead onto a smaller road off the highway. Diane pulled ahead but decided not to pull onto the dark road, choosing instead to go to a parking lot up ahead that had lights. There, Mike asked her to get out of the car, and when she did, he handcuffed her and threw her into his vehicle. Diane knew something was wrong, so she started kicking and fighting. She managed to get the passenger door open, and as Mike hit the gas, she flew out of the car and onto the ground. As she was trying to get up, Mike had swung the car around and was heading right towards her. She leaned out of the way just enough to get bumped by the fender and thrown to the side. When she got up, she could see the car in a gas station parking lot pulling around to make another attempt at her life. Diane was able to run up a set of stairs and hide. When Mike got back to the area, he got out of the car and looked for her, but when he couldn't find her, he hopped back in his vehicle and sped away. Diane actually knew a family who lived in one of the houses at the top of the stairs, so she made her way there and banged on the door until their teenage son answered, and she finally got help. She was able to give a description of Mike and his vehicle, but back then it wasn't easy to link cases together, so her case wasn't linked to any of the previously assaulted women. On November 12th, 27-year-old Maria Santini was working the register of a little clothing store in Willingboro, New Jersey, when a man walked in wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. He asked for the manager, but Maria told him she wasn't in but could give him her number. She looked down to get a piece of paper, and when she looked up again, the man was pointing a sawed-off shotgun at her and told her to open the register. She did, and Mike took the $148.55 in the till before tying Maria up at the hands and legs. He then explained to the frightened young woman that he was going to take her to a house and rape her. He told her he wasn't going to do anything else to her, but if she fought back, he would kill her. Mike put Maria on the floor of the front passenger seat and covered her with a blanket. Then he drove them to a rented house. In the house, he took off Maria's clothes and hog-tied her on the living room floor. Then he left and returned wearing women's clothing. From there, he took a bunch of pictures, eventually moving her into a bedroom and taking more pictures with her wearing a variety of different shoes. Then he laid on the bed next to her and touched her genitals, but she told the police there was no other sexual activity. He changed back into his regular clothes, had Maria redress, and drove her to a fire road in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. He told her to wait until he had completely driven away before walking out of the area. She was also able to give the police a description of the man and his vehicle, but there wasn't much else to go on. A little over a year prior, the same clothing store had been robbed by a man matching Mike's description. A different young woman had been working, and after the man pulled a gun and asked her to open the register, he ordered her into the shop's back room, but the woman refused. She said, quote, "No fucking way, I'm not going. That's all there is to it." The man tied the woman up, put tape over her mouth, and left. The detective who interviewed Maria thought it was possible that Mike had been scared away when he was challenged by a strong woman, but he couldn't get over it and returned to teach her a lesson. Unfortunately, on November 12th, it was Maria working instead of the previous victim. 37-year-old Gene McFall was a real estate agent in Bossier City, Louisiana for about 5 years. On April 27, 1982, she was in a sales meeting when a man who identified himself as Dr. Zach called the office. After being notified that he had called a number of times asking specifically for Gene, she excused herself from the meeting and took the call. Gene left and met Dr. Zach at a housing development and picked up the keys to 5 different houses to show him. The building contractor saw Gene and her client at the sales office that morning and would go on to describe a man who matched the description of Mike DeBardeleben. The office secretary had also seen the man and gave a similar description. The two left the office at about 10:30 that morning, and Gene never returned. Her car was found parked behind a motel that night, and an investigator had hoped that Gene had possibly taken a liking to the man and they were spending some private time together. When her car was untouched the following day, that theory was busted. They searched through all 5 houses that Gene was going to show to the man, but nothing was discovered on the first pass. It wasn't until the second search that someone noticed some little bits of insulation on the floor of one of the houses and went to check the attic. It was there that Jean's body was discovered hanging from a rafter with a rope tied around her neck. She was fully dressed and her clothes were soaked in blood. Investigators believed that Gene had gone into the attic willingly, probably prompted by questions by the potential buyer. There she was manually strangled, then tied to the rafters with the rope. They believe the attacker stabbed her in the chest by swinging his arm around her while standing behind her. Then he walked around and stabbed her again. There was a mark on her white blouse where you could tell that the man had wiped the blood off of his knife. Her purse was gone, and an autopsy concluded that Gene had not been sexually assaulted. There was no trace evidence and no apparent motive for the murder. The man had asked for Gene by name, so they assume he saw an ad in the newspaper that the woman appeared in and set out to target her. But why? On the evening of April 28th, Mike had been at 2 malls in North Carolina where he passed a total of 30 counterfeit $20 bills. By then, the Secret Service had gotten enough descriptions that they were able to put together a sketch which they distributed to malls all over the country. The mall passer had become notorious in malls on the East Coast, and the sketch started working pretty quickly. A year later, in April of 1983, Mike had a close call at a mall in Gastonia, North Carolina. He used a fake 20 to purchase a book at the B. Dalton bookseller, but the cashier thought the bill looked suspicious. Despite accepting the bill, he then followed Mike when he left the store. He watched the man go into the toy store across the way and make another small purchase before heading to the JCPenney. The cashier went back to his store and called security. The security guard's pager was broken, which delayed his effort to track down the counterfeiter, and by the time he started closing in, Mike had sensed something was up and he headed for the exit. He hopped into a car and drove out of the parking garage as the security guard jotted down the license plate number. The license plate would come back stolen, and the mall passer would remain on the loose. That close call wouldn't cause Mike to stop passing counterfeit money, though. Over the next month, he passed bills in Atlanta, Georgia, Columbia, South Carolina, Reading, Pennsylvania, and Lynchburg, Virginia. From there, he headed west to Tennessee, which was on the radar of the Secret Service agents. Over the years, they had studied his travel patterns and knew he would soon be in eastern Tennessee, so they began canvassing shopping centers there. On May 24th, Mike passed 14 fake 20s at a mall in Johnson City. The next day, Mike was in Kingsport, Tennessee, where he tried to make a purchase at a B. Dalton bookseller, but the cashier had been recently counseled by the Secret Service and had a sketch of the mall passer as well as a description of the fake bills. She told Mike that she couldn't accept the bill, so he tried to pay with 3 $1 bills, but she wouldn't return the 20. Then she picked up the phone and called the police. While she was on the phone, Mike claimed that his wife had gotten the bill as change from another shop and that he was going to go get her. Then he disappeared. The police arrived at the mall and the Secret Service office in Knoxville was notified, but Mike had left Kingsport. He had driven about 2 hours west to the newly opened Foothill Mall in Maryville, just southwest of Knoxville. An agent for the Secret Service had anticipated the mall passer's inclination to prey on cashiers who were likely new to their jobs. He knew that Mike liked to pass his bills at bookstores, so he met with the employees of the Walden Books, ensuring they knew exactly who to look for. It was only minutes after the agent left the store that Mike appeared at the register with a paperback. As the cashier happily sold the book to the counterfeiter, the manager popped into the back room and called the authorities. Mall security immediately started following Mike as the Secret Service agent was notified. They watched him make a purchase at a toy store before following him through the main corridor of the mall. Right as the agent caught up to them, Mike realized he was being followed and took off running. As he ran through a doorway into a parking area, he was stopped by 2 police officers and slammed against a car. He claimed they could let him go because he had been cleared by the other officers, but the agent was announcing over the radio not to let him go. Mike DeBardeleben, the mall passer, was finally caught, but the Secret Service had no idea that they had actually taken an even worse criminal off the streets. Mike had an ID in his wallet that said he was Roger Colin Blanchard of Charlotte, North Carolina. The vehicle he had been driving had plates that came back stolen, but the car itself was registered to James R. Jones of Alexandria, Virginia. The physical descriptions of each man matched the person they had in custody, and it became clear they were the same person. Doubting either was the man's true identity, they submitted his fingerprints, which came back as a match for Mike DeBardeleben. Inside the car, they found more counterfeit bills, guns, pornography, various legal and illegal drugs, 18 stolen license plates, 9 forged driver's licenses, a fake police badge, and bags of cheap merchandise. In Virginia, agents went to the address where the vehicle had been registered and found a small furnished studio apartment. It was a basic bachelor pad that didn't contain any evidence, least of all a printing press. It was only when they flipped through the local phone book in the apartment did an agent find a little piece of paper with the name of a storage facility. At the nearby Landmark mini storage, the manager let the agents into the unit that had been rented by a man named J.R. Jones. That storage unit was too small to house a printing press, but they found a lot of other incriminating evidence, though not much of it was about counterfeiting. They found a printing plate and some more counterfeit bills, but that was all that would be used in their case against Mike for counterfeiting. They found a red, domed emergency light that could be plugged into a car's cigarette lighter. They found a ski mask, ammunition, handcuffs, and rope. They also found a bag with a bunch of handwritten notes containing women's names and addresses. In another bag was what an agent described as a kill kit, the tools one would bring with them if they were planning to kidnap and kill someone. Eventually, the agents started the process of packing everything up and taking it to the Washington field office where they could go through everything and catalog what they found. It was about 4 o'clock the following morning that one of the agents picked up a cassette tape and popped it into a cassette player. What he heard was horrific. Mike had recorded himself torturing and sexually assaulting his wife, Karen. While they were still trying to piece together who exactly they had in custody, they found a second address associated with Mike, the house he had rented in Falls Church, Virginia. Agents found that house vacant, and the neighbor said that the occupant had been evicted in 1981. After canvassing storage facilities in that area, they finally found another unit that J.R. Jones had rented at Private Storage in Manassas, Virginia. It was in that unit that they found Mike's Multilith 1250 surrounded by junk. Within the piles of junk were more printing plates and ink. Once the unit was cleared out, they counted $207,700 in counterfeit $20 bills. But again, outside of the evidence that would convict Mike of counterfeiting, there was more evidence of other crimes. There were 6 handguns, ammunition, women's underwear, more stolen license plates, and a number of women's driver's licenses. The Secret Service knew that their suspect was involved in other crimes, and despite their original goal being to put away a counterfeiter, they got permission from the Secret Service director to investigate the contents of the storage unit further to find out what those crimes were. Once they had permission, they started the long task of going through everything that had been collected, and it didn't take long to start putting the pieces together. They found scripts that Mike had written to use for his bank investigator scam. They found lists of addresses for bank executives that could be used in his ransom attempts. Then they found photographs of various women. In some photos, you could see Mike in the frame, and others you couldn't. It would become a pattern that the women in the photos where Mike wasn't in frame could be found alive, where none of the women where Mike was seen in the photos were ever found. Authorities speculated that Mike killed those women. They also found another recording that Mike made while he was torturing and sexually assaulting a woman. That woman turned out to be Lori Jensen, who was burned with a cigar while Mike asked her how it felt. They collected receipts, bank records, and notes that gave them a timeline of Mike's movements for the past few years, and then they began cross-referencing that with what could be his other crimes. They cataloged a number of journals that contained incriminating information. There were entries where he described crimes, and in one entry he mentioned the name Dr. Zach. Agents interviewed Karen again, now much more willing to talk, and she outlined the crimes they had committed together. Then they tracked down a woman named Barbara Abbott, who had married Mike sometime in late 1979, making her his fifth and final wife. The couple weren't together for long, but she said little by little Mike told her about his fake IDs, his forged 20s, and even played his torture tapes for her. He had also taken nude photographs of her, which he threatened to release if she didn't do what he said. She helped him with one bank investigator scam, but it failed when a suspicious bank teller called the police. Both Mike and Barbara were originally arrested, but Mike got his wife to change her story and claimed she pulled the scam with someone else. After that, Mike was released and Barbara had to serve 60 days in jail. During Christmas of 1980, Mike got a really bad case of pneumonia, so Barbara dropped him off at the hospital and used the chance to take off. Mike went on trial for his counterfeiting first, where he fired his lawyer and represented himself. He was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was brought up on more counterfeiting charges and tried a second time, where he was found guilty and sentenced to 10 more years. After his third trial for counterfeiting, Mike was determined to be a dangerous special offender and received another 135 years in prison. After that, Mike was tried for the kidnap and sexual assault of Lori Jensen. At that trial, he also acted as his own lawyer, which made him able to cross-examine his own victim. Because of that, he was able to make Lori sit through the recording he made of her sexual assault. Further traumatizing his victim would not make Mike seem innocent to the jury, who found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 180 years in prison and made sure to inform him that this sentence was to run consecutively with his counterfeiting sentence. He had a combined sentence of 315 years and would become eligible for parole after serving 59 years. Then Mike was tried for his kidnap and sexual assault of Maria Santini, where, of course, he acted as his own lawyer. Again, he was found guilty and the judge sentenced him to 60 years in prison with parole eligibility and 30.5 years to be served consecutively with his other sentences. That brought Mike's sentence up to 375 years with parole eligibility after just under 90 years. That meant he would get parole in 2073 when he was a ripe 130-plus years old. It was safe to say that Mike would never see the outside of a prison, and he died of pneumonia on January 26, 2011. Mike DeBardeleben was only convicted of a fraction of the crimes he actually committed. Investigators found pictures of 40 different women in his storage unit, and most of them remain unidentified. Despite circumstantial evidence that he murdered Gene McFall, he wasn't indicted on that crime due to lack of evidence. He was also suspected in the murder of real estate agent Edna McDonald in 1971 and a man named Joe Rapini in 1983, a month before his capture. He was also not tried for either crime. While he was being tried for counterfeiting, investigators were tracking down his victims who would be brought in so they could identify Mike as their attacker. Mike had been indicted on 11 more counts of kidnap and rape in the case of Lucy Alexander, but after having been sentenced to an additional 180 years, the prosecutor got permission from the victim to not bring it to trial. Mike was going to spend the rest of his life in prison, so she didn't see the need to have to go to trial where she would likely be cross-examined by her attacker. And that decision was made before the Maria Santini trial, so she likely felt she made the right decision when more time was tacked on. Mike became somewhat of an enigma to the people investigating his crimes. It was like two criminals were operating inside one body. The counterfeiter who spent his days passing forged bills, and the sexual sadist who spent his nights hunting for young women to torture and rape. And in between, he seemed to kill others for no discovered reason. A true monster on every level. Thanks so much for letting me tell you this story. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave a comment. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.